I feel healthier and my constipation's gone too. My name is Matthew Kroll.
And I've somehow acquired this bizarre ability, and I've got a job at a club with it. My name is Shahir Dowd.
And this is the only podcast about movies, specifically the film Psychokinesis.
Really good title, Psychokinesis, although it could be a horror film.
It sounds like a rock song by Disturbed in like 2002.
Oh, yeah, and yeah.
Psychokinesis.
Yeah.
Psychokinesis.
Or maybe like Slipknot. Maybe I'm thinking of the Psychosocial Baby mashup between Slipknot and Justin Bieber.
Oh, I have heard that, but is it because it's a baby? Yeah,
Yeah.
Baby.
No, a little bit different, but you get the idea. Hi, everyone.
Welcome.
Well, you're John Oliver now.
Yeah, I know. I've got a little bit of the British accent.
Yeah.
Welcome.
To the only podcast about movies. If you're joining us for the first time, hello.
And we are the only podcast about movies. Yeah. Don't let anyone else tell you differently. We're the only ones.
Also, don't look anywhere else but where you found this feed, because you don't have to. Just trust us.
We're like the worst new girlfriend. We're like the new girlfriend that's just like we're the only ones. You know what I mean?
Let's say we're the
boyfriend.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, or anyone you're dating. Yeah, new We're
the new partner that's the worst.
Yeah.
Welcome to the podcast.
I hope you're into that. Shahir, buddy, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Busy as usual, but then so are you. You have taken up a new place among the internet.
Yeah, it's been a weird ride. For those of you who don't know, I have joined the Extra Credits team as the narrator and showrunner. Their wonderful YouTube channel on the internet box. Please check us out. We do a whole bunch of stuff. Basically, the motto is because learning matters. They've changed it from because games matter, because it used to just be about video games. Now it's about video games, history, sci-fi, politics. We just launched Extra Politics, which is a fantastic series. Everyone should check that out. It basically talks about the gamification of the American political system and how politicians actually play it.
Okay.
And it is terrifying, and once you see it, you're like, oh god damn, it's so true. It's very interesting.
It's in a way, I guess, maybe by broadening out into politics, you're basically saying there is a gamification of almost every facet of our lives, and this is why Extra Credits is important.
Yeah,
because it's about how games work. Right?
Yes, exactly. So I've been working on a lot of that stuff, and everyone's been super nice. Obviously, Dan, the original voice, he's been doing it for 10 years, and I'm jumping in there now.
Yeah.
And people have been overall like really. If they either they really like what I'm doing or they don't like what I'm doing, but they are being like constructively the community is great, is what I'm saying. Is the criticism I'm getting is constructive, and I'm listening, and we're trying to do the whole thing out. So it's good to go.
So if you're an Extra Credits listener and are joining us for the first time, welcome. We appreciate having you here. And this is I'm saying this like this has something to do with me. I have no relationship.
You are 50% of this, which means we're married by internet law.
By definition, then am I 25% of Extra Credits?
You are no, because you haven't done anything on it yet. The second you get
that's fine. I'm good with that.
A bean person.
But also, if learning matters, then you have come to maybe the wrong place for movies, because we're just gonna gas bag for the life.
Untrue. I think we are very educational. And
edumacated.
And we are so edumacated. And if you'd like to be edumacated alongside us about anything film related, please email us at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com, or you can get a hold of us at onlymoviepod on Twitter. We actually have a lot of listener feedback and/or statements today.
Yeah, and a lot of this goes back to our Deadpool review, which you can download from any streaming service that you listen to. But I want to come to a couple of emails that came in response to Deadpool 2. This one coming in from Steve. I was listening to your Deadpool 2 review, and I agree that the amount of violence was a bit too much, even for a Deadpool movie. While I've always been a huge X-Men fan, it was exciting to see how they will bring X-Force to the screen. Deadpool 2 seemed to be more in love with the ultra-violent gore and silly jokes and referential humor than it was with taking these characters seriously when they need to be. Now, so just a side note there, on our episode of Deadpool 2, I think I kind of went on a little tangent about having a little bit of difficulty with the film because of the ultra violence in it, but but not just because of that, because there was a baby in the audience of my screening.
Right.
And I think that put me in the frame of mind to think about the violence slightly differently than I would had I just been watching it on my own or watching it in a audience filled with people my age.
You looked at it from a more human perspective.
Yeah, a little bit. Or a little bit more like, what does a baby think about this?
Yeah.
And we also have Jennifer emailing us. And do you want to read out Jennifer's email?
Sure. Hey, Jennifer, thanks for writing. We have this email that goes a little something like this. I don't know how to reconcile the film exploiting and wantonly revealing the hyperviolence that Deadpool inflicts, while also trying to tell Russell that violence isn't the answer. Both Russell and Deadpool were victims of abuse who didn't feel like they could rely on anyone, who want to turn to extreme violences to right the wrongs done to them. But for Deadpool, the violence is okay and shown to us for entertainment, but for Russell, it's going to mark him forever, turning him into a bloodthirsty monster. I think that's incredibly true.
Yeah. I think when we were discussing violence there, I think, the thing I said in that episode, and I wanted to go on a much broader side tangent about this because it's an area of interest that I have. But I think, I don't want to suggest in any way that Deadpool 2 has to address violence in society in relation to the way we watch cinema or anything like that.
Yes.
I don't want to suggest that Deadpool 2 is even a film about violence. It basically, it glorifies and enjoys violence, and I don't think that is necessarily problematic. I think the reason I found it problematic in my experience was because there was a baby in the room, because the Santa Fe shooting had just happened, because we are having an ongoing conversation about gun violence in our culture and society. And I think there is an important conversation to be had around the role that media and entertainment plays in that. But what I don't want to do is we've seen politicians since the Parkland shootings and Santa Fe shootings, particularly on the Republican side, suggest that violent movies are the primary reason to blame for those shootings. And we've also seen suggested that pornography is the primary reason to blame. We've had a senator get up and say pornography is the main root cause of the Santa Fe shooting.
Oh, man, I'd love to see the cache of that senator's internet history. Would see exactly how he's doing.
I think the question is far more complex than suggesting that, and I don't think that movies are the sole issue at play here. There are obviously, we've seen whenever there's a case of a copycat crime that's copied from a movie, it's obviously we get into this question of causation versus correlation. Does the movie directly cause someone to do something, or does it correlate with that person's instinctual behavior? So if a person was more likely to kind of commit violence, did the film kind of nudge them in the right direction? And the thing I think, there's a lot of history to this topic. It's as I say, it's a particular area of interest for me. Matt, how do you feel about the role of violence in movies? If you were thinking about that within the framework of America, do we accept that America as a country has a problem with gun violence? And if we do, then how does every industry respond to it?
I think there's no denying that our country has a gun problem because guns keep killing children at places of education.
And in a way that doesn't happen in any other country.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's definitely stuff that should be, everyone should be clamoring to figure out what they can do. Every industry, I mean. As far as films go, it's a bit of a twofold thing because you don't want to censor things, but at the same time, you might want to think a little bit more about what you are creating and why you are creating it, and the true audience in which you're creating it for.
Right.
Because, movies have ratings and we can only do so much. And obviously, people at movie theaters are normally, not being paid a ton and don't really care that much. And kids who are below the age for R-rated movies are getting into R-rated movies all the time.
Yeah.
I think, there needs to be an overhaul of sort of that enforcement system. I think there needs to be a bit of an overhaul in the advertising and the marketing budget, because at the end of the day, you'll get more people for your R-rated film if you kind of sort of a little bit market it towards kids.
I think Deadpool is a kid case study because I think that is a movie that is attempting to be a 4-quadrant movie, and so appealing to kids is one of those things.
And it's interesting because Deadpool as a character is very Bugs Bunny. And again, I'm not saying that Deadpool shouldn't be done in this way or whatever. I think it's just a matter of trying to figure out and taking a little bit of responsibility for the idea that this is being shown to people that are young people, I guess, that might not be able to understand it or don't have, for instance, or don't have the social or familial structures to dissect it comfortably and ingest it in a sort of non-broken way. And again, I'm not saying that Deadpool 2 is causing violence, but I will say, and I said it in the podcast, the violence in Deadpool 2, especially in the beginning, when he's just like mowing down who people were told are bad people.
Yeah.
It was so violent, I got bored. Yeah. And that's a terrifying psychological place for me to be in.
Yeah.
And I dissect this shit for a living.
Yeah.
So to be that bored with violence, that even though it's made to look really cool, like that to me, like the violence in Deadpool played for jokes, is a little bit more in my line of like sort of cartoony, like when spoiler alert, a character falls into a wood chipper that you don't think would ever happen to, and it's played for a laugh, and it's like you don't see excessive gore except for like blood splatter out of the thing, but like there's a long scene in the beginning of this film where Deadpool is just going through a warehouse hacking people to pieces, and it's and that's not played for a laugh. That's played for look how cool this looks.
Yeah.
But when you do that so much where that cool thing just becomes benign, then you have to sort of start thinking about it. So just back to the question in general of what Jennifer asked too. I think the reason why it's a very stark thing again in Deadpool 2 is because one of the main plot points of this film is exactly what she said. This young character, if this character turns and kills one person, who is admittedly a bad person in this film, then it kicks this character off on an arc that makes them become a murderous supervillain in the future, causing Cable's family to die and then starting the whole process of this thing again. And to have Deadpool be the person that is trying to teach this lesson, but yet still killing is a little awkward. I would be interested. I need to watch it again. Mm-hmm. In the beginning, he's hacking and slashing and killing and whatever, and then bad things happen to him. And then he kind of goes through, he doesn't straight up murder people the same way he does. So maybe there is a bit of a change, but the movie's tone doesn't reflect it. Like, even if you count like the body count in the beginning versus after he tries to help Russell, I think the body count does go down for him, but I don't know if it matters, or the movie's definitely not trying to say that in an overt way. So I do think there is a bit of a contradiction in the film that if you look at it too closely, and not too closely, just closely, it can take some enjoyment out of it. I found the Russell storyline very moving, but when you do look at it through these lenses, it still can be moving, but it makes less sense.
Right.
Narratively.
Yeah, and I think that's a good approach that Jennifer pointed out, and I think that you speak about as well, is that looking at what the film is trying to say and how does the violence play into what it's trying to say. To me, I'm sort of less. I don't want to put this on Deadpool 2 because I think Deadpool 2 is a satire in some way, and it is supposed to parody violence, but I think it enjoys and indulges in the violence a little too much. But that's not really what its main raison d'etre is. The thing when I think about this subject, there's one person that comes to mind, and that's Stanley Kubrick. And in 1971, Stanley Kubrick released A Clockwork Orange. A few years later, after a number of copycat crimes that were committed by people who were quoting his movie or suggesting that they had been inspired by that, Kubrick himself voluntarily withdrew the film from public distribution in London. And he was like, and he has a complex relationship with this, and I want to bring up a quote here. It's a slightly long one, but just bear with me because I think it'll kind of go into this. But Stanley Kubrick said, "There has always been violence in art. There is violence in the Bible, violence in Homer, violence in Shakespeare, and many psychiatrists believe that it serves as a catharsis rather than a model. Mm-hmm. I think the question of whether there has been an increase in screen violence, and if so, what effect that this has had, is to a very great extent a media-defined issue. I know there are well-intentioned people who sincerely believe that films and TV contribute to violence, but almost all of the official studies of this question have concluded that there is no evidence to support this view. At the same time, I think the media tend to exploit the issue because it allows them to display and discuss the so-called harmful things that they from a lofty position of moral superiority. Films and television are also a convenient whipping boys for politicians because they allow them to look away from the social and economic causes of crime about which they are either unwilling or unable to do anything. And so the thing to remember here is Kubrick basically understands that A Clockwork Orange does not incite violence.
Right.
He basically he understands that there are no official studies that support this idea that movies cause violence.
Sure.
But at the same time, he saw that violent acts were being committed in the name of his film. And I think he was actually also getting death threats himself. And so he voluntarily withdrew the film. Now, he is a filmmaker of extreme stature at this point. Warner Brothers basically gives him carte blanche to do whatever he wants. And he agrees to take the movie from distribution. It was taken out of British distribution for many years. It was banned, effectively self-banned.
Right.
And that's a really interesting thing to think about because he wants people to understand his movie, but he's saying the second that someone does something in the name of their movie, in the name of his movie, even though he doesn't believe his movie caused them to do it, he's going to withdraw it and take it out of public circulation because he doesn't want to be a contributor to that, to the potentiality that happened.
Well, it sounds almost like to the conversation. Like he doesn't want to be able to have politicians point at him and be like, look, because the violence is going to happen one way or the other. It's just they chose to put it on this film.
Well, I think the thing there is he's saying essentially, I want to really think about the people who are watching my movie. And even though I don't think, I think there are bigger causative functions here, like, economic and social instability. I want to withdraw this from the public conversation because I don't feel comfortable having put something out there. Now, would the makers of Deadpool feel the same way if, for example, some sort of shooting involving a child was directly linked to their film? And would they do that? Would the studio do that? I don't know the answer to that. I think it's a complex issue, and I don't think that films are the primary thing to look at, as Kubrick said in that question. And I think also filmmakers should have the right to express themselves freely. And one of those things is being able to express themselves in satire, express themselves in extreme violence, express themselves with sexuality. I think there's a fair imbalance in the way we treat sex and sexuality,
right,
versus the way we treat gun violence. A film Jennifer and Steve to look at and to think about maybe is a documentary called "This Film Is Not Yet Rated" by Jack Kirby.
Ah, yes.
Which is an examination of how the MPAA works. I don't think it's a great movie, but I think it introduces us to a lot of topics around how we broadly consider violence in cinema and sex and sexuality. So I would look to those films, and I think Jennifer and Steve or anyone else listening, if you have further questions about this, maybe this is a topic we could actually dissect in some detail.
We should do an episode about it because, again, I am fascinated by the fact that, especially in American culture, be it cinema or television or whatever, so violence, which is a thing that inherently in real life makes people, I'll just make a global generalization here, makes people feel bad.
Yeah.
Violence is the thing that hurts people.
Yeah.
But sex is the thing that generally feels good.
Yeah.
We lust after violence, and violence is okay on things. This thing that makes it is bad for people.
Yeah.
But sex, in most cases, when violence is not, or then you get into consent and all that things. But it's the two things are so dichotomous to one another, depending on the psychological look that you're coming at it from. The thing that's designed to make you feel good is taken back and held back a little bit further away than society than the thing that is designed to make you feel bad, and people find enjoyment of the bad thing. We are weird.
No, well,
we are weird creatures.
We are, and I think just a counterpoint there is the reason that might be is that films, as Kubrick said in that quote, allow us for catharsis, and it's also transgressive, which means we can experience things that we wouldn't experience in real life. So sex is something that we, for most people, experience in real life.
Yes,
violence is something they don't. So a movie kind of allows that catharsis to experience it. And I do think this would make for an interesting subject. We've got a couple of other interesting subjects that we would do two, I think, deep dive debates on.
Yeah.
One is separating art from the artist.
Yep.
And the other one is this one, which is violence in cinema.
We're going to write that down.
And so if you are a listener and think that would be an interesting topic, please write us in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com or hit us up on @onlymoviepod. Please write us in with your thoughts on the subject
Yes,
as well,
please.
and how you feel about it, because I think that would contribute heavily to an interesting debate, and we'd love to kind of maybe spawn these debates with a listener focus, so questions that you are interested in us answering.
That'd be really nice. And then and all of that aside, if you're sick of both sex and violence and just want to write down some thoughts about us, please leave us a review on iTunes whenever you get a chance. We'll take as many stars as you're willing to give us.
We had a lovely Twitter comment from John who said, "Just found your podcast. Thank you for seemingly being the only ones out there to realize how completely bonkers bad War of the Planet of the Apes was." And we had a lovely back and forth about that. Thank you, John, for that Twitter comment, because I actually have not thought about War of the Planet of the Apes since we saw it, which might be a good indication of generally how I don't know if I would say bad. I was sorely disappointed by that movie, having loved Dawn of the Planet of the Apes.
Same.
Yeah.
Anyway. Oh, and sorry, I was going to get into this before we jumped back. We're ping-ponging social media all over the place. We have a new listener review on that thing I was talking about on the iTunes box with some 5 stars. This is from Jewish Dave, who says, "To be honest, I think you guys made me like You Were Never Really Here." That would say Shahir, the Shahir solo joint with Brendan McCarthy, more than I did before I listened. And for that, your show rules. I also have a podcast about movies, but I don't, because your show is the only podcast about movies. Well, I mean, Jewish Dave.
Thanks, Jewish Dave.
We could have plugged your non-existent podcast.
Yeah, we would have loved to.
Yeah.
Please, Jewish Dave, reach back out to us if you're listening to this episode, and we will definitely plug your podcast and take a listen to it as well. I just like your name, by the way, Jewish Dave. I wonder if your co-host is Muslim Mike.
Well, I mean, it would be a really nice in this political climate. That'd be a really nice thing.
Yeah.
Anyway. Psychokinesis. We're only 23 minutes in. Let's talk about the movie that's in the title.
Yeah, Psychokinesis. So I wanted to do this movie for a couple of reasons. A, it's a Netflix release, which means it's easier to get to. I'm not saying that being easy to get to was the sole function, but this was
just really wanted to.
I just wanted something easy. No. The other reason was that the director of this film, Sang-ho Yeon, had made a film last year that appeared on a number of top 10 lists, and it was a film that I really wanted to get to review. But we kind of just it just slipped under the radar for us, and that was Train to Busan, which I think for me, I was knowing that he had a new film on Netflix, Psychokinesis. I was like, oh, this is a good opportunity to kind of like do a slight review of Train to Busan, or at least just watch the movie.
Sure.
So I was excited to do that, and I did watch Train to Busan, which is available also on Netflix. Matt, you must watch Train to Busan.
I've heard that.
It is excellent in a way. It refreshes the zombie genre in a way I didn't think was possible at this point.
Yeah.
But the other way to think about it is, did you see World War Z?
Yes.
Did you like World War Z?
Not particularly.
No, it's not a very good film. But Train to Busan basically takes what I think was a really interesting scene in World War Z, which was a zombie outbreak on a plane.
Yep.
And does it on a train. And basically makes that the entire movie, and does it really, really well, and reminds me of the kind of, I guess it may be a trope to call it the Spielbergian touch, which is like finding the human story within the grander sort of disaster epic.
Right.
But he manages to do that and do it really well and effectively and emotionally resonant with the backdrop of zombies happening, and doing that thing that I think good filmmakers do, which is that making sure that your focus of what your film is in the right place, rather than making it just about zombies biting each other, because that as a trope gets tired pretty quickly.
Oh, Shahir, zombies don't bite each other.
Or yes, they do.
They do not.
They must feast on each other at some point, right?
No, they don't. The second that's the whole thing. It's the science behind zombie shear. See, once they're a zombie, they're not going to try to eat each other because the flesh is putrid, and for whatever reason, they only want that sweet alive flesh.
Live flesh.
Yeah.
Okay. So that made-up thing has got some rules to it, obviously.
All the made-up things have rules to them.
So before we jump into Psychokinesis, please see Train to Busan. Now, Matt, the other reason I wanted to do it is that a couple of the reviews I'd read had said things along the lines of this is the finest superhero film released in the last decade. And I thought it might be an interesting counterpoint to the superhero films that we've been watching.
Sure.
Tell us what it's about.
Well, IMDb says this film is about after drinking water from a mountain spring, a bank security guard gains telekinetic powers, which he must use to save his estranged daughter from an evil construction company as a superhero.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make a bold statement up top.
Okay, go.
Before I even tell you my opinions of this film.
Okay. So this has nothing to do with the film. This is just a bold statement.
It's a bold statement outside of my otherwise what I think how the film did as a piece of media.
Okay.
I don't think it's a superhero movie.
Okay.
I think it's an action movie that references superheroes, and I think it's the same way a superhero movie, like that's calling The Matrix a superhero movie.
Okay.
Which you could, but I think I need to, and I didn't have time before this actual review. This is sort of something that came to me this morning when I was sort of digesting the film. I think. And again, this is the most funny part because you did say this thing, this imaginary thing has rules.
Yeah.
Like this is kind of what I'm doing right now. But when I think of a superhero movie, I think of, it doesn't just have to be superpowers. It has to be kind of,
spandex.
Well, I think honestly, weirdly enough, a costume or an iconography have to be involved.
Okay.
Again, that's my own personal read of it. I understand that it has evolved and whatnot. But when I was watching this, even when they're like, whoa, you have superpowers, I was like, yeah, he has superpowers. And he's defending people he cares about. So that's very heroic. Mm-hmm. But like there's kind of, and I loved the fact he didn't have a costume. And I loved the fact that like the look of the entire thing. But there's a little bit of the mythos, I think, of a quote superhero that was not here.
Okay.
Again, this is in no way taking away from my enjoyment of the film. I just found it interesting that everyone was calling it a superhero film just because it had a superpower in it.
Now, yeah, and I think the one thing that's immediately interesting about this film is that the use of the term superhero is kind of borrowed from other films. It's almost as though characters in the film have seen superhero films and are now confronted with a superpower, so that they're kind of referencing it like that. I think this is an interesting topic that we will delve into in much detail. But just starting that, I think the reference points that would be of interest here is: do you think the film Unbreakable is a superhero movie? And the other film I was going to mention as well was Hancock. Do you think
Hancock is because he used to wear it's like a deconstruction, but it's still a superhero movie. He used to wear a costume. He used to be a full-fledged superhero that has, quote, fallen from grace. Like, so because the world that it sets up, and it's been a while since I've seen Hancock, so I'm just going off of that.
Side review, Hancock's not a very good film.
Yeah.
It's a very good 2/3 of it.
Oh my God, the first 2/3 is great. And then the plot happens.
Yeah.
So what was the other one? It was
Unbreakable.
Hancock and Unbreakable. Unbreakable, I think the film itself is not a superhero movie until the very end, which I don't want to spoil anything because if you haven't seen Unbreakable by now, I know it's old, but you should.
Yeah, and there's a sequel coming soon.
Yeah, the way that story plays out, it basically, if I'm using this awful example, but like, you know, that pulling off a sheet off a brand new car to finally see what kind of car it is. Like, it's sort of that like conceit of like, you've been watching this whole thing and you don't quite know what it is. And then, oh my God, last 10 minutes, whoom, because of all this information.
Yeah.
Superhero movie. So like, it's it's hiding the fact that it's a superhero movie entirely until the very end, because the mythos of what a superhero is plays very strongly into the last bit of that film.
Okay.
And it's almost used as a surprise. It's a very Shyamalan, M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong.
What a twist.
Sort of conceit of how he tells stories. So again, I don't want to downplay my enjoyment of this film by calling it not a superhero movie. I was just I think because all I'd heard about it was it's the greatest superhero movie, and I was like, it's a great movie.
Well, I think, again, I feel like these are broad topics because we want to get into, like, should people see this movie or not, and, and deconstruct the movie itself. But I think that's because what you've sort of started to identify is what is the litmus test for what you define a superhero movie is. And I think there's a sort of overall taxonomy of items that you could kind of put into that list. And for you, I think iconography is one thing. So the suggestion that there is superhero, a superhero costume, perhaps a villain is part of that part of that lexicon.
Maybe.
Also, I think the superpower. There was an interesting quote yesterday that came out from Terry Gilliam. Terry Gilliam is currently on the road promoting his film, The Man from Don Quixote. Mm-hmm. He was in an interview and he was asked the question, what do you think a film like yours, the Man from Don Quixote, is going to do in a superhero-influenced world now that, basically the primary mode of entertainment are superhero movies right now, just as Westerns were back in the day. And, Gilliam kind of went on this sort of tirade, which everyone is kind of, putting everywhere. But I think he did say one interesting thing in this. And he basically said, I hate superheroes. It's bullshit. Come on, grow up. We're not going to be teenagers for the rest of our lives. It's great to dream of great powers. Superheroes are all about power. That's what I don't like about superheroes. They've got to beat other powerful superheroes. Come on, a bit of peace, love, and understanding is what we need. I think, again, take it in context. Terry Gilliam is tired and basically asked a question that's not related to his film.
Yeah,
and kind of
that's very true.
I always, when you hear a quote like that being clickbaited around, you should just very carefully, don't be like, oh my God, Terry Gilliam, he doesn't like superhero movies.
It's the 1900,000th bajillionth time he's been asked a thing that has nothing to do with the film he's on his press junket for, and he's probably just like, you okay, fine, sure,
exactly. And it's but oddly, it's the one thing that gets repeated out, like in every website.
Man, but I would crack so hard in a press tour.
Yeah. The thing that I really liked about there, and I guess this comes down to that sort of taxonomy of what are the elements that make up a superhero film that I think are, we're going to talk about in detail with this film in particular. The thing that I think is interesting is the power fantasy. I think superhero films tend to fulfill a power fantasy that we all have. Can we fly? Could we use our mind to alter the fabric of reality as we understand it?
Yeah.
Now, later superhero films, as the genre has evolved, things like Watchmen and obviously Justice League and the Avengers, what have you, all kind of get into a different frame of reference where superheroes exist in the world. And we all understand that superheroes are a thing. And so we start, those films start questioning the consequences of powers in the world.
Sure.
But I think the thing that's interesting about Psychokinesis is that Psychokinesis is and this is unique because it is according to Wikipedia, and I would have to do some further research to figure out if this is actually the case. Psychokinesis is the first Korean superhero movie, so there haven't been superhero movies made in South Korea up until this point. Mm-hmm. And I think the interesting thing here is this plays into the primary reason that I think superhero movies kind of fulfill as a function, which is, do they kind of give us a power fantasy? And the power fantasy here is really specific. This is a power fantasy involving a true case that happened in South Korea. So the thing that happens in this film is a young girl, Rumi, who's the daughter of the said bank teller.
Yes.
Has a little restaurant as part of a community of restaurants that is slated to be demolished. The construction company that is going to demolish these buildings are sending in basically thugs to like rip people out of there, and they're kind of squatting, and it becomes a standoff between these thugs and the community that lives there already.
You got a real Les Mis situation going on with the wall of junk.
Yeah, exactly. And this I think if you're a Korean film audience watching this, the echoes of what happens here are very familiar to the Yongsun incident, which is basically the almost identical scenario where a community of people who lived in these watchtowers, which was slated for demolition, basically walled up into their watchtowers and started throwing Molotov cocktails. 5 people died, a couple of police officers died. The police force was the judiciary on this case slated that the people, the tenants, were to blame because they fired off the Molotov cocktails, but the judiciary didn't also acknowledge that they had a legitimate gripe and they were basically being ripped out of their homes at the time. So, you have echoes of that. Mm-hmm. And introduced into this film is basically that same scenario, but with a power fantasy of a character who can basically level the playing field or equalize it in a way that pushes it in favor of the social justice the social inequality that's happening. And I think that's an interesting framework to watch this film in, is that it has a very specific point of view when it comes to the superhero fantasy.
And it also points that fantasy, and as you said, in not only in a specific direction, but in a smaller direction. And
much smaller direction.
I think as our superhero films have ballooned, the need for a smaller feeling films that sort of do a lot of the same, things, but just in a much lessened scale. The world isn't in peril. It's not even like there's another bad person with the same level of abilities as this guy. Which I really enjoyed. It's literally, as you said, if it's a power fantasy, then it is leveling out that level of power. If the power on one side is money and government, the power on the other side of these people is literally a dude who can push things around with his mind.
Yeah, there's an interesting conversation that happens in this film which deals with who actually, it's basically, I guess this is a spoiler, but there's a character later on who's kind of the closest thing we have to a big bad. And she sits down with our hero and she says this quote, which I thought was really great. Those with real power aren't people like us. They were born to win. And do you know what they can do? Do you think that they can fire energy waves or something? No, they have power over this country, the Republic of Korea. The country itself is their power. Everyone else, including you and me, are just slaves to the society. Why can't you accept it? Know your place. That's the lesson you're learning from getting your daughter arrested. Yeah. And I think there's an interesting framework there. Stepping aside from all of that, do I think this is a good film? I do not.
Okay.
I think the film, like my initial watching of it was that there is a sort of a clunkiness with the tonal shifts that happen in this movie. It's basically trying to tell these two stories with almost two separate kind of tones to them. One is the story of this daughter who's being evicted from this building by force in this community that's kind of like trying to fight back against it. And there's a death that happens very early in the film. Her mother basically gets killed.
Yeah.
In a
beginning's real dark.
Yeah, in a really, really rough way. It's like I gasped out loud when it happened. It's the first few minutes of the film, so it's not really a spoiler.
And it never, this is a minor spoiler, I guess, but it never gets that dark again.
No, and it immediately switches to kind of a slapstick comedy because the father, played by Sung Ryu, is almost exists in a different film. He's got this sort of like buffoonish way about him, and he ingests this liquid which makes him a superhero that he kind of has to deal with. And the movie bounces between those two things in a way that I don't feel is complementary.
Sure.
And doesn't really pay off.
Let me ask you this: how much South Korean film have you watched?
Well, I used to teach South Korean film.
Oh, then you're great. So you got this. So let me then just say, so I came from this back in college, and again, I admittedly probably haven't watched as much as you, but back in college, I went on a huge South Korea, Taiwanese, Japanese, so sort of all that side of the world,
East Asian film,
but like almost like the action. Supernatural side of those films. I bought a region-free DVD player. I was popping R3s in there left and right.
Yeah.
One of my favorite films that I still, to this day, don't know the full plot of because it doesn't come with a subtitle track is The Resurrection of the Little Match Girl.
Right.
Also, at movies like Guns and Talks and like things like that. All of these movies that have very serious like topics in a weird way, all do, or a lot of them do, when it gets into this action space, seemingly have this odd tonal shift of slapdash, like slapstick comedy sort of stuff, like intertwined with it, or there'll at least be one character that is tonally outside of what the rest of the stuff is doing. And I've noticed that throughout. Have you seen that, or is that something that is maybe a confirmation bias as to the type of films that I have watched?
It definitely occurs, and I think the we talked about this in our review for The Handmaiden.
Oh yes,
the Chan-wook Park film. There is when you're studying films of another country that's not your own, I think you have to be a little cautious not to generalize a film as belonging to an entire genre, an entire subset of films. Like you shouldn't. I think you sort of get into this ethnographic argument about, like, does a film represent an entire country?
Sure.
In the same way is, like, you wouldn't say Deadpool 2 is entirely representative of all that is American cinema. You might say that, but that mischaracterizes, say, all independent American cinema.
Right.
So you have to, and I think we should do this conversation. I just want to make sure that we don't do that thing that suggests that we know everything about Korean cinema,
of course,
based on this one or two things, or Korean culture.
Yeah, I think your Deadpool scenario is actually kind of the point I'm making, because I think Deadpool 2 100% does encapsulate a large chunk of big budget mainstream cinema. And
you could extrapolate from Deadpool 2 a sense of what American culture is like.
Right.
And I think you can certainly do that. You got to be cautious about cultures you don't know or understand,
because it's not built the same, and it's not all like that. I was just saying, and again, I think it is a lot of confirmation bias on my own point, because of the style of films from the time period in which I watch, which is basically between, like, I don't know, maybe 2000 and 2007 is really where I sort of deep dove.
Well, and the two most famous Korean filmmakers on the planet are Bong Joon-ho and Chan-wook Park.
Yeah. And
both of those demonstrate, I think, the exact thing you're talking about, particularly Bong Joon-ho in a film like The Host. Even his film Memories of Murder has that kind of tonal shift. But I think the thing that I respond to in those two films, even Chan-wook Park's film, I mean, Old Boy is a good example, which has not quite slapstick comedy, but it has elements of absurdist comedy in amongst a fairly heavy story. The Host does as well. The Host has this incredibly funny scene that is about the death of a family member, and it's funny, weird, and resolves in like sadness.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good example of that tonal shift that I have seen in those two filmmakers. That is far more congruous and successful than I saw in Psychokinesis. It doesn't quite work here. And the thing that I think is maybe have set me up for failure in my enjoyment of Psychokinesis is that Train to Busan is a tonally really consistent and tight film. So this sort of jumping between these two genres doesn't land. And I think fundamentally the story doesn't allow these two kind of tonal shifts to land in interesting ways.
And I think the fact that the two tonal shifts don't actually gel together might be why I felt a little bit disparate from the actual caring of what the characters cared about in a weird way.
Totally.
So for instance, while I did think the performances were really good, and this might come too from I'm always questioning if I miss something when I watch a film that's not done in a language that I natively understand, because you're reading and you're not getting all the subtleties and things like that.
Yeah.
But so the story is this guy left his daughter and his family when the daughter was 10 years old, and then the mother suffers this accident, or not really an accident.
An accident, yeah.
And then at the funeral he comes back because the daughter calls because she found the number in the phone, and then there's sort of this rekindling of their relationship alongside with him deciding to use his newfound spring-based superpowers to help her cause.
Yeah.
Now, that's all fine and good, but I never got especially, and I think it's probably from the whiplash of the tone shifting back and forth, I never really understood, they grew closer, or had, I'll even put it in air quotes, growth, because the script told them they had to. I never saw a moment where, even when they had these father-daughter interactions, nothing felt to me like an actual conversation between a father and a daughter. It's just and now because we've talked more, I care more. And now, and I know that might be a verbal cue thing. It might be the fact that I'm reading it. Maybe the emotion doesn't read as much because my eye is blinking down to subtitles and back up to faces.
Right.
It could be all of that. But I didn't feel like, and I think that in conjunction with the tonal shifts made me not connect to any character's one plight. Even the characters whom I think are in the right in the story, being these people trying to fight for their places that they, running their businesses from instead of this evil corporation, comically evil corporation.
Yeah.
So the stakes of the film never land for me because I can't get behind characters or their connection to each other or really their motivations. And the tonal shift really does put the father in his own little box.
Yeah.
And he literally wanders into scenes like a dotard.
Yeah.
Like just sort of like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Oh no, wait, that's my daughter. And then going like and doing superpower stuff.
Yeah.
So he never felt like there was agency until maybe the time he gets out of jail at one point.
And also, I think the tonal shifts mean that there's a sort of a really jarring juxtaposition between what's happening with the daughter and what's happening with the dad. The dad has this sort of comic idea that he's going to turn his new superpowers into a magic trick.
Yeah, he can work at a club.
You work at a club, and then he has to go and deal with this, like community that's being that's being drifted apart. And again, I even me who has some education in South Korean cinema, I still found the story of the community that's being torn apart for a mall. I didn't quite understand what was happening there or why it was happening. It was only upon reading about like what this reflects, and that I kind of came to understand it. But I think watching it, from the get-go, I didn't really get what the stakes were in those sequences. So when the superhero kind of fight happened, I was like, why is this happening? Why can't these two groups kind of come to a consensus? There's something comic about that. And again, I think because this echoes a real event but introduces a superhero element into it, there is you have to consider how this film plays to a Korean audience who knows and understands the reference point. It's almost as though it's not quite the same thing, but I'm using this as an example, and I hope this example doesn't offend anyone.
Let's do it.
But imagine if we did a 9/11 movie with a superhero suddenly flying through and saving people. You didn't know what 9/11 was. Your reference points for how you view the film would be very different from someone, watching and understanding it.
It's literally like as if, and let's even back away from 9/11 just to be safer on the analogy.
Yeah.
If Die Hard was based on a true story.
Yeah, exactly. And
it would feel entirely different, even though John McClane's cracking jokes, if it was culturally relevant that like there was a terrorist attack on this building.
But this leads me to this interesting question, which I think, again, I don't highly recommend the movie by any means, but I think the movie allows us to have an interesting conversation around this question of what do superhero films function for us as a society? And I think about that Terry Gilliam quote, which is the power fantasy. And I think, if we think about, again, the genre taxonomy, the sort of categorization and listing of how we identify what a genre is, I think the power fantasy is an interesting element to it. And I wonder if this allows us to broaden that conversation because the power fantasy here is really specific. He gets a specific power that he only uses for this thing. And it doesn't quite make sense because, and again, I think this is a sort of an interesting topic about Korean culture because everyone's submission to authority in this film is unwavering, even in the face of unequal power.
Yeah.
So, for example, Mr. Shin, the person, the main character, Seokhyun Shin, basically has the power to break free from any prison he has, but he never uses it when he's arrested. He can fly. He can actually he can move he can move buildings, he can move whole cars and that sort of thing. But police come and arrest him and he just kind of, okay, all right, I'm going to go there. And then he gets put into prison. And the conclusion of this film also has him go to prison for 4 years, but he still retains his power.
It's interesting too. Now we've been talking about this movie for a while. Now we're getting towards the end of the episode. So now it's going to be full blown spoiler town. So be prepared. The interesting thing is he's arrested once for a thing he didn't quite do. Like it's like a minor infraction. Then he finds out his daughter is like it's the last stand of the daughter and the people in the area. So he breaks out and flies over there to fight them. The interesting part about that is after the fight, nothing changes.
No, nothing changes, and he gets arrested.
And he decides to go away for 4 years, and they drive up to the end where the big battle happened, and he's like, why are we stopped? It's like, you don't recognize this place. Here's the empty lot where all the stuff was broken down, but because the company made bad business decisions, they couldn't actually build the thing they wanted, so they just cleared the lot and made it just this dirt patch.
I actually thought that was really poignant.
It was super poignant. That was one of my favorite things in the movie. But, like, it was just so, like, nothing changed during the superhero battle, and then even after he lost, everyone still loses, including the corporation, because they're bad at their jobs.
Yeah.
Like, and it was a very like, oof, this is real. And then the end conceit is they drive up to a different spot where now the daughter is running her fried chicken restaurant out of a truck, and it's called Superpowered Chicken. It's got a cool like neon sign of the father lifting stuff, and he like floats beers, and it's all funny.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it paints a picture that basically, this is what I got from it.
Yeah.
Fight as hard as you can. Corporations will always win. Corporations will always screw themselves over. And the common people will always be able to find a way to just sort of like continue to be happy doing something.
Right.
And that's a weird... That might be a cultural thing.
I think the thing is here as well is that yeah, like I said, like me watching the film, and our frame of reference is very much American superhero film, so very westernized. We have a superhero versus a bad guy that is equally superpowered, and they're going to fight, and their fight is philosophical most of the time. You know, like their fight is about a quest of ideals between one person and another person.
Yeah.
In this situation, the quest is less philosophical as much as it is about inequality, and there is this, and it's all kind of built upon this sense of overriding authority. Now, we did some interesting work when we were so I TA'd for a course in South Korean cinema, and then I gave a couple of lectures in that course as well. I will freely admit the person is Aaron Mannion Park, who's been on this podcast before.
Yes.
Who
shout out,
who was the lecturer on that in that subject, and a very, very, very good academic, by the way. His work is excellent. He basically, I felt very privileged to be working directly for him, and basically getting tutelage from a master in both East Asian cinema and Korean cinema, and learning a lot about the historical context from which we watch films. And I think we did some interesting reading and material there. There was a particular book called The Remasculization of Korean Cinema, which talked about the way in which masculinity in Korean identity had been subjugated under both the Japanese occupation and the industrialization of the late 1980s. And it basically means that men in Korean film tend to be emasculated, and the films themselves kind of work to remasculate them. So you get this overt masculinization. You see it in a film like Old Boy, for example. It's a man who has his privileges as a man stripped away from him, and the entire film is about him rebuilding those, but also having them stripped away at the end as well. And I think that character is something that we see echoed in a number of Korean films. We see it in Bong Joon-ho's film Memories of Murder. We see it in Lee Chang-dong's films. Oasis in particular, and in this film you see Mr. Shin is a character who's been emasculated by debt.
By the system.
By the system. And, he is kind of a frail man. He's basically a man who steals toilet paper at this point.
His apartment is a shithole.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't really understand why that is. It's like, well, he says he left the family because of the debt, but I was like, well, you could divorce your wife, but that doesn't mean you have to leave her, right? Like why does that happen?
Yeah, it didn't quite make sense. Maybe there's I don't know.
There might be a cultural reason for that, but it seems odd that he loves his daughter. He's not cheating on her. He's not going out to another family.
Is it a shame thing?
It might be a shame thing, and And you see at the end, even though he kind of wins the battle, he still accepts that there is an authoritative consequence to what he's done, and he goes to prison for it. And he accepts his prison term for that. So I think, again, I don't think this is a great movie. I really want to stress that as well. I think watching it in context, I'm not enamored by this movie as much as I was by Train to Busan or something like that. And I was hoping that this would be an interesting antidote because, again, the reviews had been like, this is the best superhero film of the decade. And I do think it is an interesting counterpoint to think about superhero films as a genre, as opposed to the sort of glut of superhero films that we watch from America. Now, with that in mind, your initial hot take on this film is that you don't think it's a superhero movie. With the sort of thinking about superheroes in terms of an overall list of items that can be interchangeable and move and shift, and thinking about superhero films as they might play to a different culture, and the conversation we've just had about it, does your thinking change about maybe what a superhero movie is and how a superhero movie can function?
I still think there's a bit superheroes. The hill I'll be willing to die on in this conversation is superheroes have a lot to do with iconography.
Okay,
and this movie doesn't have any of that, which is fine. It shouldn't take away from whether you like the movie or not. It's just if we're classifying it. I think that's one thing. I think also the thing I kept thinking about like power and like even the quote from the evil corporate lady who was an amazing performance by Jung Young Mi, or that might have been the character. I think it was Hong Sang.
Yeah, her name was Miss Kim.
Miss Kim. The fact is, superhero movies themselves are always the most interesting when it is not just a super strong person versus a super strong person. They always are.
Yeah.
The reason I think that Superman hasn't worked in films since Superman 1 is the fact that Superman only works if you can get him onto like using his morals and things against him, and he has all this power, but he's trapped by all these things because Lex Luthor has a different kind of power. The second Lex Luthor puts on a kryptonite suit, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Like it's so the battle in this film is a very Superman versus Lex Luthor, and Lex Luthor, I mean, being the corporation sort of in this thing. It's not one person. It's just sort of like the government and the money and all that stuff. That fits the superhero mold, but the thing that makes Superman a superhero movie, and I think this not, is this. It is a silly conceit, but it's also interesting how quickly psychologically we as a culture can get behind putting on a costume or a uniform to do things, or even rallying behind a symbol.
Yeah.
And that's something that Superman does that this movie does not. And again, do I want this movie? This is the counterbalance to what I'm saying. Do I want this movie to be that he then rallies behind a symbol and makes a costume and that's going to be it? No, because again, I think that'd be a third tonal shift that would just feel weird.
But I guess in terms of the iconography question, can a superhero movie, and the point here is I think I do agree with you that iconography allows us to identify genres purely based on visual. And even a film like Unbreakable, which kind of breaks that mold, bad choice of words there, but he eventually gets a costume. It's not quite the costume we would imagine, but he wears this kind of hooded, what are those things called when you're in the rain? Poncho.
Yeah.
And it kind of becomes a costume for him.
But you don't know that that's his costume until the end of the movie.
And I think the thing is, though, I would argue that this is very much a superhero film. And I think something about it is the ironic twist that his costume is very plain and ordinary, and I think there's something interesting as well. Just aside from that, to look at the broader context for what superhero films are supposed to fulfill, and like we get into a hairy topic here because I think, for example, maybe this is a bad example, but I feel like John Wick, in a way, kind of becomes an odd sort of superhero-esque type film. Now, actually, that's not quite the good example.
I disagree. It's the power fantasy thing we've been talking about.
Yeah, the power fantasy is kind of to me the key factor here, and it's a power fantasy in the face of an opposing force that is either ideological or physical.
But that's a shit ton of movies that have nothing to do with superheroes as well. Like, you can't just use power fantasy as a stipend for that, because literally every hero's journey story we've ever heard is a power fantasy.
Okay,
you latch yourself behind a character that has more power or agency than you actually would, and you go forth with them down an adventure. Like, again, you go to the Matrix, you go to, I mean, anything. You could go Mission Impossible. You could go, like, all of these things, and it could be from training, it could be from whatever. But like the power fantasy is just a thing that we do in stories, not just superhero movies.
That's a very fair point. I wonder if there's a sort of more specified way we could apply the term power fantasy as it relates to superhero.
I think it might be. Let's see if we can figure this out. I know we're going a little over. Because of the iconography, there's a different kind of power fantasy going on. There's the power of being able to affect a situation, but also the power to be weirdly acknowledged for it. Does that? I don't know if this is correct, but perfect example. Let's go Neo in the Matrix. Okay, Neo's not looking for, throughout the entirety of the 3 films, he's not looking for recognition or to at least be seen doing good things or being an inspiration for something. You can do recognition could be a whole different bunch of pots.
Yeah.
He's just going about his thing, trying to fulfill his destiny or trying to make his world a better place through this own thing that is a power fantasy in itself. A superhero, for instance, like any Spider-Man or even Superman, being he's supposed to be a symbol. Batman does it in the opposite direction, where he's trying to be a symbol but to strike fear in people.
Yeah.
Like, there is a legitimate point where the power fantasy goes beyond the actual powers of the superhero, but the ability to affect the way that the society or the people in the story view and react to that person.
So there are a number of, because the superhero genre is broad and big now, again, it's kind of, to me, superhero genres, films are in the same place that Westerns were back in the late 60s.
Yeah.
I wonder about a film like Super, the James Gunn film with is it Rainn Wilson?
Yeah.
Which basically it's a character that has no power that creates a power fantasy for himself through iconography. It's like he creates a suit and he tries to affect change. Is that a superhero movie? You see, because he has
no powers.
He has no powers, and maybe it's similar to Kick-Ass as well.
Kick-Ass has powers technically.
Does he?
Weirdly, he doesn't. It's almost like the lack of power. He doesn't feel pain. His nerve receptors are all
okay. So let's
minor.
Disregard. But let's look at Super.
That's interesting, because I would have to really sort of break it down, because Super and Batman are only separated by billions of dollars, and by that I mean Bruce Wayne versus the character in Super.
Yeah, I mean Batman is a good example as well.
But Batman's riches is also always written to the point where wealth is a superpower.
Right.
So I'm going to even toss Batman out of this conversation, because money is his superpower in that regard.
Yeah.
Super, I don't think, is a superhero movie, but it is a power fantasy about an everyday person trying to fulfill that power fantasy in the best way they can in a realistic, quote unquote, setting. But there aren't any superpowers. I think there's check boxes, again, in my brain to call a movie a superhero movie. And while this film, Psychokinesis, checks off many of them except for an iconography standpoint for me, and Super checks off a few of them, I'm sure, but without an actual superpower part, that breaks.
If we were to talk about the weighting of the elements that are required to make a superhero film, to me it sounds like iconography is a sort of heavier weight than actual powers, like an actual supernatural.
Yes,
power.
but also it has to be the center of the Venn diagram. It can't just be 2 or 3 things. I think, at least for, again, this is me. Everybody at home, you can write in onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com what you think the criteria for a superhero movie is. I think mine are: you have to have superpowers, you have to have an iconography, and you have to go. I think if you're doing, you don't need this so much anymore because it's so ingrained. But I think if it's a new superhero, how that power came to be and how that links to who the actual person is behind that, I think has something to say in it too. This film, Psychokinesis, I really enjoyed that it was just a meteor, that the juice got in the water, and then we don't need to worry about it.
The thing about this movie that was one of those things that I didn't enjoy was the fact that I thought there was something interesting in the power, because there was even a suggestion in the film where she was like, where did he get this power? I don't know. Maybe it was when my mother died. And in fact, we see the meteor coming down as intercut with the mother crying as she's about to die. And I thought that was an interesting interplay, this idea that the power actually originated because of the spiritual death of the mother.
Oh.
And I, because it comes down immediately as the mother dies. And we see it intercut with the mother. And then it just so happens that it happens to fall upon the father. So I think, there's an interesting dynamic at play there, but I don't think the film really explores that.
It doesn't do enough with it, but that's really nice. I like that.
Yeah, I think that was an interesting idea, but it's not explored in the film to a great extent. Again, I know we want to wrap it up here, but I think I don't think that this is a particularly strong movie. I feel, like even watching the movie from a technical point of view, there's a lot of, you can see that the movie feels a little like hammed together, like mismatched out. There are scenes where you feel like he's at a funeral, then he's not at the funeral, and then he's back at the funeral, and you're like, oh, they kind of like just shuffled these scenes around, and they don't really make a lot of sense. And he wanders out of like sort of a slapstick comedy scene into a really serious scene, and the tonal shifts are really jarring, and it's kind of that's set upon by the first scene as well with the mother dying, which is again horrific to watch. I gasped out loud when it happened. And then we jump into kind of a slapstick comedy. And the movie doesn't really connect those two things. But I think the broader the reason why I think it was good to do this movie, even if it wasn't necessarily a good movie, is that it opens up a broader conversation to get us thinking about the functionality of superhero films and what they do. And I think that for me, the interesting thing that this film does is introduce a power fantasy into a real life scenario that is recognizable for its audience. Mm-hmm. And it's and I think that has a lot of value. Imagining that, again, bad example, but a superhero introduced during 9/11. And I think if we think about what the Avengers, what a lot of movies, this is a sort of the broader visual iconography of disaster superhero movies since 2001 have often borrowed from 9/11. We see buildings coming down. You can argue a Batman v Superman is entirely
based around a 9/11
a 9/11 type scenario. The Avengers kind of deals with the fallout of major events happening in New York City that feel a little bit 9/11. The imagery feels a little bit 9/11, and what they do is, as a power fantasy, they introduce superheroes into those scenarios. So what if people were there who could help us and who could turn the tide of that event? Now, that's not to say all films are 9/11 focused, but
that's what I was going to say. I don't know. Again, that's a larger conversation because there's been movies with exploding cities and skyscrapers before 9/11. It's just now we think about them in an American text in more of a real context, which can affect the way we watch them. Same as the effects of this film.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Watching this movie, knowing that there is a real event behind it. And I think there's something to think about there in terms of the functionality of what a superhero film can do and can offer the people watching the film. It offers this sort of interesting power fantasy. And that comes back to this Terry Gilliam thing. I don't think that this is a particularly strong experience as a movie. I think it for reasons we've outlined, that are there are many of.
Yeah.
But I think if you're interested in genre studies and you're interested in us trying to figure out the taxonomy of what makes a superhero film, which I think we've started to get into here, I think this is worth a watch to consider it in that context, and to think about it there. If you're just trying to pick things on Netflix to watch, I would highly recommend Train to Busan, because I think that does something really, really special. But Matt, your final thoughts on this movie?
I guess I when watching it, it's funny. The conversation has made me like it more, but I think, as you sort of said, the experience of watching it as a whole does not connect. It's the tone shifts. Despite the fact there are lovely characters, what the characters do with each other do not resonate whatsoever. The fact that it is based on a true-ish story about what happened to these people that were sort of taken away from the places of their business and the way they sort of ran their lives makes it feel like it has more weight. But watching it myself, I didn't know that at the time. So and the movie didn't even ever make it a point to even make that situation feel real. So with the exception of the death of the mother. So I still can't get behind that 100%. Now, listen, if you are bored and want sort of a fun, weird take on a movie with a guy with superpowers in it, and like to see the oddity of a basically a Superman level of power, but flying around in like sweatpants and a middle-aged guy, a middle-aged South Korean man, there is something to be said for that as well. And you should check. This is a movie I would say people should check out, but I'm not going to promise that you'll like it. You won't hate it.
Yeah.
That's a weird thing to say, but I don't think this is going to be many people's favorite superhero movie, which is why when I read a lot of these reviews, I was like, I was shocked that everyone sort of felt that way.
But I think the reason people are responding to it is that, and this is always my complaint about the sort of the superhero genre in general, is that I feel like we're getting the same movies. So it's interesting. I think there is something to responding to a film that just is not the same, is kind of different,
even though it does follow the same beats, with the exception of the very end, which is still kind of the same. I don't know. That's a bigger thing.
Yeah, but I
get what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it kind of like offers us an alternative point of view, even though I would love it if this film, I would have loved if this film was really successful at melding those genres together. In the same way that The Host, Bong Joon-ho's film, was really successful in doing the monster genre in a different way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or, so I would have, if this film had done that, I would be very, very excited about this movie. It's very unfortunate that it isn't, but not every film can do that. It's an interesting film if you're really committed to the superhero genre, and want to see things that are outside of the Marvel or DC cinematic universe.
Or if you really like, I would say if you really like South Korean cinema in general, I think you could still get something out of it. I don't think.
No, I disagree with that. Because that would be like saying if you like American movies, you could watch Ghostbusters, the female reboot of Ghostbusters and enjoy it.
You're calling this movie level of
No, I'm just saying that like if you don't just because you like a country's films doesn't necessarily mean you'll like every film in that country.
No. But I think if again, and I'm basing this off of my own history, the films that I've seen based on certain things. This is a American cisgendered white male's perspective of the South Korean cinema that I watched between 2000 and 2007.
Right.
It feels a lot like those to me. And for that, I was like, oh, well, this feels a little bit like the stuff I used to watch. That's more of what I'm saying. Like there is a tone of action movies from there around that time that this hits.
Right.
And of course, not all South Korean. So I take that back. But if you like sort of the action comedy genres of those films that are a little bit more in their blockbuster camp, I think you'll find something here.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that this is a South Korean, in a way, almost a South Korean response to the superhero film, because the superhero film is a predominant mode of culture we have right now. Like, so it would be interesting to watch, superhero films from other countries and see how they play. And this happened as well with the Westerns. Every genre has a cycle like this, so we did see Japanese Westerns, for example, and American Westerns were influenced by Japanese samurai movies. And so there is this kind of intercultural crossplay that I think is really fascinating. I wouldn't say this is a great movie to watch, but I think there's it's an interesting thing to see the response, and that might be why the reviews are so positive, even though I wouldn't give that. It's weird. I think David Elrich's reviews from IndieWire kind of is fairly praiseful of the film, but eventually he lands on a C grade. He's talking about, well, it's really cool that this movie came out at the same day as Avengers Infinity War, and it's like it does these interesting different things. But C.
I think there's an interesting thing. I think maybe in a lot of the reviews, and maybe a little bit of ours as well, there's a want for something different so bad that you're gonna talk about all the great things it can do and that it will do, and it makes you talk about. But if you really have to look at the movie as just a film, it does not warrant that level of praise. It's more showing us things that we're like, oh yeah, that would be really cool if you did this right.
What's a really good example of this that was exciting and successful last year that we talked about?
What?
Colossal. Colossal took a genre that we had seen and become familiar with and did something totally unique with it, totally interesting with it.
I want to watch that again. The movie's great.
And surprised us all and made me excited about what the potential for that genre was.
Yeah.
So this is not that.
Right.
You know.
Anyway, this has been the only podcast about the film Psychokinesis. Thank you so much for listening. Shahir, when you are not busy designing your full head-to-toe Lycra bodysuit complete with triple cape, where can folks find you?
By the way, this suit is very tight and there's a lot of overbite, is all I'm going to say.
That doesn't matter. As long as you feel good.
Remember when Jack Black got into the Spider-Man suit?
I do.
It's like that.
Oh, man. Well, where can they find you in this Jack Black-esque outfit?
You can find me sweating and grinding on my website at www.shahirdaud.com. That's SHAHIRDAUD. I think I've just put you off your lunch and ever visiting my site.
That's
Matt,
so funny.
Now, when you are wearing your perfectly composed Wolverine costume from the 1990s based cartoon series, which is perfectly yellow, you've got the sideburns and everything, where can people find you? Or where can people buy this from you?
Oh, well, you can find me just berserker barraging all over the place at matthewkrol.com for my life and works. Also Skeletor, the number 4 PREZ on Instagram, or Emperor MSK on Twitter. And you can now start seeing me or hearing me and seeing animated me on Extra Credits on YouTube. Just search them on there. We just did a great episode, I think that will be out around the same time as this one, about ladder systems in team games and how they feel awful. There's some good stuff in there, so check out all Extra Credits has to offer. Also, Extra Politics. It's so good. It's so good and smart. So, and shout out to everyone who worked on that.
If you're an Extra Credits listener, welcome to the podcast.
Yes, and well, with that, I guess you will hear us next week,
where hopefully we will be diving into our Hereditary,
or perhaps being someone's neighbor, or maybe just counting to 8. We don't know which one yet.
Yeah,
but you know what? You'll know when we do.
I got nothing. I was like, I tried to have a joke. I got no joke.
Just back away from the mic while we're talking, like we're having a conversation. We're ending and we're talking about things, and I think it's really important.
I wasn't saying anything meaningful.
No, we didn't.